Alright, so now we come to chapter 17 of the Quenta Silmarillion. Okay, so this is about 300 years, a little over 300 years, that one day King Finrod Felagund, is out in Osiriand, and he sees these people, these strange people, camping there. They're asleep. He goes among them. He picks up a harp, starts playing, and they wake up. These are, of course, humans. Chapter is titled "Of the Coming of Men into the West." Now, it says, "Now these were a part of the kindred and following of Beor the Old, as he was afterwards called, a chieftain among men. In many lives of wandering out of the east, he had led them at last over the Blue Mountains, the first of the race of men to enter Beleriand, and they sang because they were glad and believed that they had escaped from all perils and had come at last to a land without fear." Felagund's watching them. They fall asleep. Like I said, he picks up a harp. He starts playing. And he played music upon it such as the ears of men had not heard, for they had as yet no teachers in the art, save only the dark elves in the wild lands. Now men awoke and listened to Felagund as he harped and sang, and each thought that he was in some fair dream, until he saw that his fellows were awake also beside him. And this is how, and this is mentioned in the Lord of the Rings, how the elves, when they make music, they can create these visions that you can see, and you can almost see what they're singing about come to life in a way. Is the best way I could think to describe that. And this is the art of fantasy. As Tolkien would explain in his essay on fairy stories, that's what fantasy does. Good fantasy does that. And it is elvish. That's what a fairy is, an elf, obviously. It says it came as clear visions before their eyes, and his elvish speech was interpreted in each mind according to its measure. Now, they had learned elvish from the dark elves, but their language had been estranged from the language of the Eldar, the three kindreds that left. And they call King Felagund Gnome, N-O-M, and his people Gnomen, which means the wise. Gnome means wisdom. This is connected to the word gnome, G-N-O-M-E, which comes from Greek. And this is the name that he actually Tolkien used for the Noldor originally in his stories. But when you think of gnomes, you're usually thinking of, those little things that people put in their garden, they look like little dwarves or whatever. In his mind, no, that's not what they were, because he was getting it from the word gnome, which means wisdom, knowledge. The Noldor were the most knowledgeable of the elves. Even in the original editions of The Hobbit, he would use this as for their name, but he would, of course, change it later. Clear up some confusion or whatever. And so men now come under the service of Felagund, and many spread out throughout Beleriand to go serve different elf kings, except for King Thingol. He does not want men in his realm at all. They're banned from going there. It says in here, where does it go when we read about King Thingol? He was troubled by dreams concerning the coming of men, even before he had heard that they had actually come. And it says, again, he bars them. But Melian, it says to Galadriel, "Now the world runs on swiftly to great tidings, and one of men, even of Beor's house, shall indeed come, and the girdle of Melian shall not restrain him, for doom greater than my power shall send him, and the songs that shall spring from that coming shall endure when all Middle-earth is changed." this story, of course, we will get to in chapter 19. Anyway, there was some discontent starts to grow. And the leaders were Berig of the house of Beor and Amlak, who was the grandson of Morak, who's the leader of one of the other houses that had come. And it does say that some men at some point do go back and return into Eriador, which will become an important region when we get to the Lord of the Rings. And the Third Age in general, really. But they're like, hey, we came here to find light in the west, and now we see that the light is beyond our reach. It is beyond the sea, and, well, there probably isn't really a sea anyway. I think we're being lied to. And, of course, Amlak says, well, hey, wait, I was never at that meeting. I never said those things. So, and then he goes and serves an elf king himself. And, of course, these lies, they acknowledge, came from Melkor, Morgoth. Obviously I did, because he's now already starting to try to sow discontent between elves and men. The purpose of men, it says in here that men, maybe I think it was one of the elf kings says that something about that men had come to aid the elves. That was the purpose, and I think that is the main purpose of why this is going to happen. Men, their reason for coming is to be taught of the elves, to serve the elves, to be taught of them, and then usurp their place. That was Ilúvatar's plan. And today, who rules the world? Mankind. And then we get to, well, they're asked about their past, and there's a darkness that lies behind them. They don't know much about it. And obviously, Tolkien does talk about this in other writings, that men had served Morgoth, and these are the men who repented, and so they were moving westward. Because, as I said, they heard that there was light in the west. I mean, some of these men don't find it. Some of them are like, hey, wait a minute. I think we're being lied to here, even though they're not. Which is part of Morgoth's doing as well. And a question arises, well, men originally meant to be immortal like elves, and because Morgoth seduced them, that they lost that, and Tolkien didn't think that maybe that would have happened, that he didn't think they were immortal originally, because he didn't think one of the Valar could really take a gift away, or that God would curse one of them just for listening to Morgoth. But I mean, well, we do tend to do that. And then we talk about Haleth, and I'll read a little section on that. First, it talks about Haldad. Haldad had twin children, Haleth his daughter and Haldar his son, and both were valiant in the defense, for Haleth was a woman of great heart and strength. As they are moving west, they are attacked by orcs. And so this is what's going on right here. But you have a woman fighting, and that she's valiant. So, even though Tolkien doesn't really go into too much more detail about her in here, he does have strong women in his story, so you can't sit there and say, oh, there's no women in his stories and they're not strong, because there are. Just because you're not seeing any in The Hobbit, and there's maybe one in the Lord of the Rings book, and two if you watch the movies, that doesn't mean anything, because there are plenty of other women. And Haleth is one of them. And hell, when you get to Beren and Luthien goes with Beren on his journey, so women do fight and can be warriors and whatever, because there's nothing wrong with that at all. But Tolkien was often accused of being sexist and misogynistic and all this other stuff, but not true. And Haleth, her father and her dad die, but she leads the people away, and they go to the forest of Brethil, and they dwell there, which is right outside the girdle of Melian. And then we talk about the genealogy of Beor's house a little bit and introduce them to some humans that we will meet later. It says here, the men of the house of Beor were dark or brown of hair with gray eyes. And that, then we talk about we have the house of Hador, who were golden haired like Hador, and they had blue eyes. So Tolkien gives you a little bit of description of what they look like here. Doesn't say anything about skin color or whatever, and none of that really matters anyway, but it's just something to point out. And then we end with, Beor dying, and the elves are like, oh, this is a strange fate. And it does say of Beor that he gives up his life willingly. That will happen with the kings of Numenor later on, although at some point that does stop, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. And so for the first time, elves see the fate, or the, what you call it, doom, as some would put it, or gift of men that comes from Eru Ilúvatar, that we can give up our lives willingly and go to a fate beyond the world, whereas the elves, they are stuck within a world. Anyway, there you have it. There's chapter 17 of the Coming of Men into the West. And so hopefully tomorrow I'll come back with the next chapter. And there you go. So until then, I will catch you all later.